Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Kevin Ham. I'm with Serped, your regional planning agency. We're doing a lot of that. We're doing all the public engagement, civic engagement on this project. I want to just thank you all for coming and throw it over to town for Michael for some opening remarks, and then we'll get right to Connor and the presentation. Mike?
Hi everyone, I'm Michael Burris. I'm the town planner in Westport. Oh, I'm just cutting the microphone, sorry. So I just want to do some introductions of the project team. I'm Michael Burris, the town planner. Dia Wheeler is over here. She's the assistant planner. She's been helping out with coordinating a lot of things.
You're gonna have to speak a little louder. We can't hear you over here.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to speak into the mic.
Well, the microphone is only for the television.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not for.
And then we have a couple folks from Woods Hole Group. We have Connor from Woods Hole Group. We have Justine over here. And then we have Sam Haynes from Coastal Zone Management. Coastal Zone Management was one of our grant funders. They're here offering technical assistance to the town. So he's available if you have any questions coming up. And we were also funded through the Municipal Vulnerability Program. We don't have a representative here from that program tonight, but yeah, so thank you all for coming. Connor, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Oh, sure. All right. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. My name is Connor Ofston. I'm a coastal scientist with Woods Hole Group. Like Michael said, we're here as a part of a large planning project in the town of Westport. It's called a Barrier Beach Management Plan. So we're looking at barrier beaches with public access and Elephant Rock Beach as well that front local roadways. Looking to how can we better manage these resource areas, these roadways, these assets, both in the day-to-day and in the mid and long-term future. So we've held a few meetings. Some of you, anyone want to raise your hand? Have you been to one of our public meetings before? With Constance, a few others, thank you. Great, so we have a good representation, a few new faces. So we're gonna kind of do a little bit of a recap of what we've done so far, and I'll tell you about some results about the beaches themselves and how they've been responding to wave action and erosion, how they might respond to sea level rise, what we might be able to do about this. And Justine, my colleague here, will be able to speak to beach management planning on a day-to-day basis. We've held a few meetings so far. Like I said, we had an introduction meeting back in March. At the end of May, we had a meeting on coastal processes, talking about sea level rise and waves and storms and overwash. We held a meeting with the East Beach Improvement Association, as East Beach Road is part of this project area as well. Today we're speaking on Elephant Rock Beach, and we're also speaking about the Nubble today. Just a plug for this coming Monday, Justine will be back in town speaking specifically about the Barrier Beach Management Plan and the day-to-day activities that not only could take place here at Atlantic Ave, but also could take place at the Nubble, East Beach, even Cherry and Webb, and so forth from there. Thank you. Yeah, on Monday, that is going to be 6 p.m. at the Westport River Watershed Association.
That just might be an error, and that's my bad. But we can update the flyer. But it's Monday. Did you want to try the microphone? She has a microphone.
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I like projecting. Does it say the 18th?
It says Wednesday, August 18th.
Okay, well, 18th is correct, but I think the 18th is a Monday. Yeah. 6 p.m. Thank you. All right, so how is everybody's vision here? Can anybody read the slides? No, not really. All right. Too bright.
Do you have a copy of the slides?
We have handouts. So a few people in the front, maybe the camera itself will be able to see the slides, but we'll speak to the slides that are in your hands as well. This meeting should be about 45 minutes or so. Maybe you'll start to see as it gets a bit darker. It's a bit of an experiment being outside, so I appreciate you all hanging out with us, standing there in the standing room. I appreciate that as well. You can go to the next slide, Justine. So what I want to talk about first is what is a barrier beach? You know, we're doing a barrier beach management plan, but why this kind of specialized focused on barrier beaches? Well, barrier beaches are very, we're handing out some slides. Barrier beaches are very important resources, not just to Westport, but to the state of Massachusetts, to the birds and the different wildlife that live here, and they respond uniquely to the coastal environment which we are on. They are built in specific ways naturally. They respond to sea level rise in different ways, and so they need to be managed in a very specific way. A barrier beach is made up of the beach face, of the dunes, which we are essentially sitting on top of here, and then behind the dunes is typically a wetland of some kind, sometimes salt marsh. If you're on a freshwater pond, a freshwater marsh. Here we're in a bit of a brackish area. Most of the vegetation is actually freshwater related, which is interesting. But this barrier beach built up from sand being deposited into the near shore by rivers, coming out of the banks and eroded out of the banks of the shoreline and transporting mostly from west to east. The general transport direction of the sand in this area is from west to east, and this sand slowly accumulates and deposits along this area and creates this strip of land between an inland water body and an ocean water body. This barrier beach area responds then to waves and storms by kind of finding a balance in this area between two water bodies. So oftentimes a storm will overwash this area and the sand will be pushed into what is Atlantic Ave or Beach Ave to the east here from us. And that is the natural response of this barrier beach to storms and to sea level rise. Next slide, please. So I've gone a little bit about what this project is about, but I'm going to just give you a little bit more detail. You may have seen us out here in the months of February and March. I know I ran into Constance on our day one here, because I think you're out at the beach every morning, it seems, which is amazing. So we are out here. We were doing a survey of the beaches. We did a topographic survey. Serpid flew a drone and took a LiDAR survey. So we have great imagery. We have great elevations. We took samples of the sediment and tested that so we know exactly what the grain size distribution is. We also delineated the wetland resources. So where does the beach transition into the dune? Where does the dune transition into the marsh? All of these things are now mapped on an existing conditions plan set that the town has, and that can set the basis for designing projects, for getting projects permitted through the Conservation Commission, etc. So that's just that base level. There's a lot of information on the existing beaches that is coming out of this project. On a second level, we took that information and we did some modeling. We did cross-shore modeling using offshore waves and seeing how those wash over the coastline. Does it erode the beach? Does it overwash the beach? And then we developed different alternatives, engineering alternatives to adapt that shoreline to such erosion, such as beach nourishment, dune restoration, etc. And we modeled how that looks. And then thirdly, we have Justine, like I've mentioned before. We are looking at the day-to-day management and daily practices of how these beaches work and what do we do with 1,000 components: dogs, vegetation planting, sand fencing. What do we do with, we'll get there, overwash, sediment management. So we have these different buckets of the existing condition, the day-to-day condition, and the long-term condition. Next slide, please. So this image here, we are on slide 6 for those of you following along. This is showing us what is our project area. We're looking at the coastline of Westport here. Atlantic Ave is called out on the western side. This is one of our 3 beaches. Beach Ave and the Nubble is called out as well. That's 2 of our 3 beaches. And then East Beach and East Beach Road are called out. That's our 3rd beach. A lot of folks have rightly pointed out, why is Cherry and Webb not one of the beaches in this barrier beach management plan? These beaches were specifically selected because they front public roadways, and the town is looking to understand this resource area to also better understand how do they manage their roadway specifically. So they're trying to kind of protect and understand their assets in that sense and manage them appropriately. So that's why we have these 3 beaches. Next slide, please. There are a few pictures here of storm impacts. A lot of the photos have been taken along East Beach, which seems to take the brunt of a lot of storms in the shoreline, but that's not to say Atlantic Ave has not experienced significant overwash. As many of you may be well aware, there was a blowout of the dunes. Was it last December or 2 Decembers ago? 2? Yeah, 2 Decembers ago. And it occurred twice. Yeah, so this beach here, Elephant Rock Beach, can easily be overwashed by storms, especially these southeasterlies that are starting to come up and hit us. We haven't seen a hurricane in many years, or at least one that came directly to Massachusetts' south coast, but that doesn't mean that's out of the question. There has been a lot of damage along the Westport coast because it is not protected by the Elizabeth Islands. You're just outside of the purview of the Elizabeth Islands, and you're looking straight across the whole brunt of the Atlantic Ocean. So again, you guys are all much more well aware of this than me, but storms can really damage this coastline. I also do want to say, one more thing about the storms. Those storms, like in 2023, December 2023, January 13th, I think 2024, they were relatively small magnitude storms. On the scale of things at the Woods Hole Tide Station, that has been measuring tides for about 100 years, those were equivalent to about a 4 or 5 year storm. So we can expect those to occur every 4 or 5 years. Whereas storms like the Hurricane of 38 and the Hurricane Carol in 54, those were beyond 100-year storms. Those were almost statistical anomalies. They were extreme events. But what I'm trying to say there is that small-scale events are having a big impact today on the Westport coastline. All right, next slide, please. We have a slide. On slide 8, you will see erosion trends. I'm talking about speak to first Atlantic Ave. This may actually serve us a little bit better. That might be easier for you all to see. But we leveraged a lot of data from Sam Haynes. The CZM Shoreline Change Database has been a product of the state of Massachusetts. It maps the shoreline along Massachusetts from the 1800s until about 2018. We supplemented that data with our survey data and a few aerial photography pieces of data that we have about 2021 and 2023 to try to measure what is the shoreline change rate along Atlantic Ave and Beach Ave. And the general trend is erosion. That trend is about a half a foot of erosion per year. So it's not, for instance, East Beach saw erosion trends on the scale of 1, 2, maybe even 3 feet of erosion per year. Those are considered very high erosion rates. Here we have a more moderate erosion rates, but again, a negative trend year over year will lead to this shoreline marching backwards and backwards if we don't do anything about that. Same goes for the Nubble, which is over to Justine's left there. The erosion trends at the Nubble are a bit less significant as they are at Elephant Rock Beach. At the Nubble, there are some areas that are retreating at about half a foot per year, but there are other areas that are more stable. So overall, the trends are erosion, and that's a response to storm conditions, daily wave conditions, but as well as sea level rise trends. So sea level is only going in one direction. The rates of acceleration can be debated, but in the long term, rates of erosion are anticipated to continue. Next slide, please. So now, understanding where we are, we have seen and care there is for this shoreline. And so we want to respond by asking the questions, okay, how can we manage this? How can we protect these assets? How can we preserve these assets as long as possible? Both from the public access point of view, from the habitat point of view, and from the resilience point of view. Because a barrier beach is important not just for the beach itself, but for the town of Westport. These are these areas are valuable on many different levels. I'm going a little bit fast, I realize that. Let me pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions as I move through here? We'll have plenty of time at the end for questions too.
How long have you been tracking erosion?
30 years. It's based on, go ahead, please.
Has there ever been positive?
Yes, there is.
Because what I've noticed with the ruins, yes, they.
Oh, okay. The ruins at the Nubble? The home that's been. Okay.
And now they're not covered.
Okay.
Which leads me to believe that there was sand coming onto the beach. And
Yes.
Now it's doing the reverse trend.
Okay. Yeah, great question. So the question is, the erosion trends, how long have they been measured for? And is it just erosion all the time? Or are there fluctuations in that? And the answer is we've been measuring this from maps that can give us a solid understanding of what it used to be since about 1895, so 130 years. In between, we have most apparently seasonal fluctuations. And I think that's something that we see here at Elephant Rock on an annual basis. You'll see that the winter condition is often eroded. The beach is much smaller, narrower, the tide is coming up closer to the toe of the dunes. But over this summer period, and maybe occurring right now, the beach slowly builds back. This is a response to the different wave energies that the summer and the winter bring. I think I have a question there.
How high is the water around this area rising?
I am going to mess this up. I think in Westport, what we've seen over the last 100 years is about 11 inches of sea level rise. So that's about an inch a decade.
Losing a half a foot here, and what's that per year for rise?
Oh, that's erosion. That's kind of the shoreline. So if we look at, say, the rack line along the beach, that is marching inland at a half a foot per year.
Half a foot in.
Yes.
How much?
And the sea level is rising on average an inch a decade. Disappear in 20 years? And that's a great question. So it comes down to what is a barrier beach response to storms and sea level rise. Barrier beaches actually naturally equilibrate with storms and sea level rise if we allow them to. If there is enough sand in the system, and if we're not putting up walls or trying to plant our flag on some spot and saying the beach needs to stay here, those beaches can overwash and they can move inland and upland in response to the storms.
When I watch like the YouTubes on how those glaciers are just falling done.
So the question is future sea level rise. So maybe historical sea level rise is an inch per decade, but future sea level rise, that's accelerating, and that has been measured to be accelerating, and it's projected to go that direction. The state of Massachusetts has guidance on what a planning level sea level rise rate would be. And
I've seen those little maps on, I forgot what website.
okay,
You push the little button and it shows the water coming closer than
yeah.
New York City's underwater.
Right. So, honestly, this beach itself is in a better position than, say, an armored coastline like Boston that is trying to stay exactly where it is no matter what the ocean is doing. This is a dynamic area that can overwash again and can move back and forth with the conditions that it essentially feels on the shoreline. So I don't think Atlantic Ave is done. And I don't think Beach Ave is done. Beach Ave is uniquely protected by the nubble itself. That, again, I use the word anchor. It's kind of an anchor for the peninsula. Much like Hull, the drumlins in Hull, that you all may have visited Nantasket Beach before. That beach was formed, it's a barrier beach, by moving sediment that slowly built its way out until it hit the drumlin. And then those drumlins are hard headlands that are kind of going to be there regardless of the wave conditions. So the sand is sheltered in a sense and held in place by those. That's what we're seeing at the nubble.
On that website, it says 25 years.
Look at the next one. I think I'll slow it down. I'll get there in a second.
Okay, I
Sorry, appreciate it. Great question. I invited the questions, and I really appreciate them. So thank you. All right, we're on slide 13 here. The heading is the sacrificial strategy. So again, just kind of hammering the point that nourishment is a temporary solution. These beaches are eroding. If we were to bring in sand, we could build out the volume of the beach. It would become wider, it would be higher, it would become a greater buffer to this facility itself, the roadway as well, and to overwash the inland. That sand must be compatible with what is there today. We have those from our surveying. We have grain sizes of the beaches that there are today. But generally we have from anywhere between medium and coarse sand, some gravel, some cobble, if you lean into the larger grain size diameters that we have on the beach here, you will have a longer lasting project. So coarse sand is better than fine sand. Westport River, for instance, is dredged by the Army Corps. Down at the bottom of Westport River is relatively fine sand, and they've tested and measured that, and it is not exactly compatible with the beaches here. If we were to put sand that was in the river on the beach here, it would wash away fairly quickly. However, if we bring in cobble and gravel where it's appropriate, that is more resilient to a storm. So we want to understand the existing conditions again and try to lead into the more resilient materials. All right, so this slide is 14. Why do communities consider nourishment? So sand nourishment is an engineering solution. Why do we even need an engineering solution when we're on a natural coastline that can respond naturally to sea level rise? And that's because we have assets here. We have Atlantic Ave, we have Beach Ave, we have this club itself that are static. They are not moving like the beach is. So we want, in many cases, we might want to hold the beach, draw the line in sand, figuratively, and in reality, where we want the beach to be, where we want the accessible, high and dry areas to be. So that's what sand nourishment can do. But it's artificially widen the beaches. And the reason that we might need to widen the beaches is because there might not be enough sediment in the system to sustain them. These did form naturally, but we have armored our coastline, we've armored our inlands, we've paved a lot of our uplands. A lot of the sand that used to come in to this nearshore system through Westport River is no longer coming here because it's been locked into place by infrastructure and by development. We also have offshore sandbars that sometimes fill these beaches. But sea level rise is slowly rising, and it is making that offshore sand less accessible. It's not as picked up by wave energy as easily or as frequently. It's not being washed into our shoreline. Kind of the depleted sediment sources that we're trying to make up for. So, where the sand can't come from, this is a question that often comes up because there's a lot of overwash. Sometimes it lands on the roadways. We say, let's just pick up that sand and put it right back on the beach. In some cases that might be appropriate, but generally, as I've spoken to earlier, this beach is trying to fold over itself as a response to sea level rise. So the equilibrium that the beach is trying to find in the ocean would mean that the beach is a little bit inland and a little bit upland. When we take that sand off the roadway and we put it back right in the wave action area, we're letting that sand get washed around and washed offshore and washed alongshore more easily. So picking up sand from one side of the beach and putting it on the toe of these dunes is not the ideal solution. Neither is taking sand from your tidal flats here or the near shore, the intertidal zone. You scrape that sand up, push it into the dunes. You'll have some benefit because you're going to increase your dune height. You'll have a better protection against run-up. But now your beach is going to be narrower and it's going to be flooded more frequently. So you're losing out in one area to gain in another. Ideally, sediment would be brought in from either inland or offshore sources. We want more. We don't want to move around what we have here trying to, fight off the tide like a kid playing, in the sand, trying to protect their castle that they built. We want to bring in sand and build up the volume of this entire system. I think I just said this, but what about overwash? We're on slide 16 here. Yes, it's essentially, I think I spoke. So we can jump to slide 17.
So after that hurricane, they brought in tons of sand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I can't speak to the specifics of how well it's working, but it's better than nothing, for sure. If your goals are to combat erosion, nourishment will do that job. And it might not do it perfectly, but Yes. Yes. So the question was, rather than scraping the front of the beach and putting it in the dune, we should be bringing sand in from an outside source. The answer is yes. There's a whole permitting process, but the state would be more accepting and favoring of a project that brings in compatible sand than as opposed to us, which just reworks and scrapes the sand that's on the beach itself. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, how about the pond on the inland side? That'd be a source of sediment for nourishment here. We haven't tested that, so that could be something to look into. If there was a need for navigational dredging, I don't think there is actually in that pond. It is probably filling in as most ponds in Massachusetts slowly are. There may be compatible sand in there. I'll get to the cost in a couple of times. So let me tell you a little bit about what a nourishment scenario looks like and what it does and what it does not do. So on slide 17 here, we have just a basic profile of what the existing beach is along Atlantic Ave here, and then drawn on top of that is what a dune restoration and beach nourishment project could look like. We're kind of horizontally squeezed, so the scale is a little bit off, but essentially we would design something that would be gently sloped to favor the birds which live here, to better break wave energy, to better reduce runoff and create a lot of space for vegetation. And then we would also build, ideally, a beach that goes out into the near shore. We designed a dune restoration and a beach restoration at both Atlantic Ave and Beach Ave. And then we ran a 2-year, a 10-year, and a 100-year storm against it. A 2-year storm is a low-level storm that we would expect to see every 2 years. A 10-year storm is a moderately sized storm that we'd expect to see every 10 years. And a 100-year storm is like a hurricane bomb that just comes once every 100 years. Next slide, please. So on slide 18, please, question please. Yes. Yeah. So the question is, Atlantic Ave runs right through where there used to be dunes. Beach Ave runs right across the top of where there used to be dunes. And it seems that during storms, overwash is going into that, and it's trying to occupy that space. And the question is this a problem we're going to have to deal with forever? And the answer is definitely yes. So if we're going to try to maintain the roads here, there's always going to be sand flowing in, washing in, and probably increasing the sound. The question was, should we take the road out? Should we take Atlantic Ave out? Should we take Beach Ave out? Those questions are a little bit beyond this project, but we can speak to them a little bit. From an asset management point of view, that might be the best decision if it becomes too costly to maintain a beach in front of it. So I'll give you a case study in Falmouth, Surf Drive. Does anybody know Surf Drive in Falmouth? A couple folks in there. We got one person nodding, thank you. Surf Drive is similarly a barrier beach facing south, right over the open ocean. And it's been eroding historically. It's lower elevation than even Atlantic Ave and Beach Ave in some places. The beach is maybe about 50 feet in front of it, and the dunes are completely decimated. There used to be healthy dune systems, but slowly that overwashing process has eroded the dunes, and they're left with just the beach and then a road at the top of the beach. They have had to manage that on an annual basis. There's always overwash there. There's been undermining. They've had to repair the road, and they can see the writings on the wall for that roadway. That if they don't do something big, then that roadway is going to be lost. So they are looking at engineering solutions. They talked about seawalls. They talked about elevating it on a causeway all the way across. But at the end of the day, they're looking 50 years from now and they're thinking that this road is not going to be here in 50 years. The town is trying to get their heads around it. Yes.
I would add, I'd add that that topic is what we call in our realm the topic of managed retreat, right? Exploring how to relocate assets and infrastructure. As another example, on slide 13, this is a beach parking lot in Barnstable. It's called Sandy Neck. This parking lot is starting construction in 2 months, and it's getting moved 100 feet back from where it currently sits. But part of that took 6 years of envisioning, having conversations, permitting, understanding access to the lot and how it would flow. So I would say that that's definitely something that's going to be explored in the future and is being explored. Projects are currently being implemented in that realm as well.
Thanks. All right, great question. So we're going to be here on the slide, quickly looking down on a map of Atlantic Ave. This is about the footprint that a dune restoration could take place. A dune restoration would build the dune higher, wider. It would provide a greater buffer for the roadway itself. It would provide more vegetation and habitat and stability to the shoreline. This dune right here. Well, actually, the design is to just extend that crest elevation out towards the ocean a bit, and then slope it down, bring it towards the ocean. Since we can't go landward because we hit the roadway, there's no space that direction. But honestly, if you build a dune and you build it closer to the ocean, it is now going to be hit by waves just more frequently. There is likely going to be a benefit. I'll talk to this in a second, but the ideal would be to pair a dune restoration project with a beach nourishment project. Essentially returning this beach to where it was in 1970. That's what this just very conceptual level design shows, is returning the beach to its 1970 width and then restoring the dunes. At Atlantic, at Beach Ave, at the double, we also looked at two scenarios. We looked at a beach nourishment scenario. Oh, question?
In the previous slide, or this one is fine. The tan area, I don't want to misinterpret what this is showing us. So
Yeah, thanks.
is that all new sand and dry beach at one time? And if so, what is the volume of that sand?
Yeah, great question. So this is a deceptive. It is not all brand new dry sand beach here. There's about 50 feet more of beach before it starts to slope into the water. That's what this is showing. So we have it says 50-foot beach berm. That's about the upland above the high tide beach. And then we slope into the ocean at a 15 horizontal to 1 foot grade. So
Just to help me envision, like, how many dump trucks or rail cars with sand in
Yeah.
that much sand?
It's on a slide. I can't recall off the top of my head, but I will tell you in just a couple slides. All right, so at the Nubble, we're looking at 2 scenarios as well. This is just kind of a footprint for a beach nourishment alternative, and then the second one shows a beach nourishment with dune restoration. That second alternative there with the dune restoration is an ecological restoration project. Instead of protecting the roadway, it is on top of the roadway. At the Nubble. We have no, this project has no, at least my half of it, does not have recommendations. Yeah, just, usually it's vice versa.
I think that is important to make clear. This project is to provide the town of Westport and the residents of Westport with options, costs, understanding, and information so that the town can then move forward with those decisions. This is not implementing any of those decisions. It's just saying, if we did this, here in the village, I'm on board with this. Yeah, or if you want to take the road, or how long you want to take the road. That is
decision makers of the town of Westport.
So how they manage their own infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I'm just going to say it again just for the TV
Okay.
that's recording, but that's a great point. Nothing that we're presenting here is cast in stone, cast in place. It's really, we're trying to give information to the town so that the town decision makers can be well informed. Next slide. All right, we are on slide 22. We are looking at a cross-shore profile of Atlantic Ave Beach. The yellow sand here is showing what the existing profile looks like. And then there's a gray dashed curve that is showing, oh, gosh, I'm totally speaking wrongly. Let me use my hands here. This dashed curve up here, that is showing the existing profile of the beach. You can see this area here that's really tall. This is the existing dune system. It looks very peaky and a little bit odd, but that's just because we're compressed horizontally. It's actually, we're using the data that we have from our surveys. This is what the shape of the dune is. And then we ran this against a 10-year storm. So a moderate level storm, greater than we had 2 years ago. And we saw that overwash and wiping out of that dune is highly possible. So that's what that red is showing. The red is showing erosion. That dune could be wiped out by a 10-year storm. And where would that sand go? It would go to the areas that are green. So it would be some of it would be deposited in the near shore, off of the beach, the intertidal zone, and some of it would overwash into the ponds and the marshes behind it. Next slide, please. Now, slide 23 is showing what if we built out that dune larger. Now, how do we respond to that same storm?
It seems like as you're feeling through, you have an old version of the presentation. You can come back to the slides and have them up and go through any of them with you. But I didn't want Connor to be alluding to slides that no longer exist. So we can hold these up afterwards, but we'll keep talking through them.
Okay. So if we built out a dune here, what is the response to that same storm? The response is that the red area is lessened. We still have some loss of what we built, but at the end of the day, the yellow area shows that we still have a dune. Rather than losing the dune, a dune remains. So a small-scale dune restoration project would provide a benefit against a 10-year storm. Benefit both to the beach and a benefit to buffering the inland roads and communities. Next slide. Lastly, we modeled a beach restoration, a beach nourishment project with a dune restoration. And the benefit is even greater. Essentially, we brought more sand into the system, and the response is that that sand provides a buffer against a storm. So some of the beach is lost, some of the volume of the dune is lost. It comes into the near shore in some instances, some of it is overwashed into the roadway, but at the end of the day, we still have our beach, we still have our dune.
Connor, since you have this here, you may want to show, why pushing the sand up onto the dunes from the beach that might actually accelerate erosion. It's just, maybe I'll just jump in. So as you have a nice flat beach as it's shown here, you have a lot of area to run up before you actually hit the dune system. But when you do push your sand into the dunes and flatten out your beach, you're actually exposing more of your dune to that erosion. So you may actually accelerate erosion by pushing in instead of depositing sediment, as Connor was saying. I just thought it was a good example of how you can actually see the profile and how it changes.
That's what we just did, right? We took the back.
We're not talking about what happened. We're talking about the future. So,
And who's paying for the future?
so that's another great question. So,
I can talk about funding sources. We have a cost slide.
I'm sorry, I'm ahead.
I love it. I like an engaged community. All right, so let's move to the Nubble. So we saw that beach and dune restoration along Atlantic Ave can provide you some resilience against a 10-year storm. Again, the trend is erosion, but we understand that these engineering solutions are sacrificial. They will need to be repeated if we're trying to maintain status quo. At the Nubble, we have our existing profile again. There's a dune system, there's a narrow beach. What happens at a 10-year storm if that directly hits the Nubble? That dune also could blow out, and it has blown out in a few spots. It maybe not every foot of length will at one time, but we could lose that dune in a moderate storm. for going further, we could undermine the roadway under that storm scenario. So while Atlantic Ave is a bit different, and it showed overwash onto the roadway, the level of erosion at the Nubble is a little bit more significant under the same storm, and there could be undermining of the roadway.
So can you explain why is the Beach Avenue, why is it undermined with a big storm?
Why would it be different?
Yeah.
I can't speak exactly to why that was the result that came out of the model, but it's something to do with either the orientation of the coastline. Is it facing perfectly south, southwest, southeast? It also has to do with the amount of sand and the size of the dune that's there today. So I think the beach on at the Nubble is a bit narrower today than Atlantic Ave is. And I think that's the result. So if we nourish the beaches, a small scale nourishment, do we gain any benefit? The answer is yes. A small beach nourishment project here actually can change our erosion trend from undermining the roadway to not undermining the roadway. We still lose the dunes. The beach that we built does still erode. It washes into the near shore. Some of it overwashes into behind the existing dunes. But the roadway is not undermined and the beach is preserved. And then the third scenario, a fairly extreme scenario for the Nubble that does not maintain the status quo, could be to restore the dunes. You know, there once was a large dune system here. What would happen if we brought that crest elevation and we drew that out inland over 100 feet, which is the amount of space that actually exists in some of that area? That would take a lot of sand, a lot of vegetation planting to do, but what would the result be? And the result is that you've created a much more substantial and stable system. There is going to be some erosion. You know, any project that's built on this coastline is eventually going to feel that brunt of the wave energy and it's going to change its shape. But instead of undermining anything, overwashing into Westport River, if that were the condition, if we restored the dunes there, it would be relatively stable against this storm. All right. So now the reality of costs, of implementation, funding sources, and timelines. It is all difficult to come by. We are not dealing with, in this case, critical infrastructure. The state of Massachusetts is often focused on protecting critical infrastructure. These are local roadways. One is just a dead-end roadway that does not go to anywhere. So it is going to be hard to find statewide funds, let alone federal funding. So federal funding can be sometimes a source. There's the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. There's FEMA. These are sometimes areas that we might be able to find grant funding, but those funding sources are drying up at the moment. So I just want to set the stage. These are long-term things. These are things that if there was capital planning for, that they could be funded, but they are going to be costly and they are going to take some time. So how costly are they? At Atlantic Ave, that dune restoration project is about $4 million. The beach and dune restoration project is about $8 million. And that is 100,000 cubic yards of sediment. What that means is about, I always have to do the math. Shoot. It's about 5,000 truckloads of sediment at Atlantic Ave. The second one. So that beach that you asked is, are we building out the $8 million one is about 5,000 truckloads of sand. Yeah. At Beach Ave, that small beach nourishment is about 1,000 truckloads of sand. It's still large, on the scale of things here, when you're working with just some kind of like hand tools or front end loaders. This is a large scale construction project. At Beach Ave, the beach nourishment project is about $1.5 million. The beach and dune restoration would be more about $4.3, $4.4 million. Say again, please.
Okay. Don't stress.
Yeah, great question. So these costs are preliminary. They are construction costs. It doesn't include engineering. It doesn't include permitting. It doesn't include monitoring. but it's sediment. It is mobilization. It is getting the trucks there, but there's other costs. There's going to be other costs.
Those trucks 10-wheelers or like the 18-wheelers?
I'm trying to picture.
Depends on the contractor.
A 20 cubic yard truck.
Yeah.
Depends on the contractor and the roads.
Have you been doing some of this at the Cape, or just like the Cape?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the project. I think one thing that Connor's going to touch on in a minute is just the scale of the project and who's funding it and how much you want to put down during periods of time. But yes, beach nourishment is happening up and down. Sometimes you can also use dredge material, but like Connor said, all of this gain is making sure you find compatible material. So we'll go look at sand pits, and sometimes we have to go check to make sure the material matches. So it's kind of the game too of everyone's looking for sand. So in Plymouth right now, they'll have news articles about sand wars because everyone's coming in and taking their sand for nourishment. And so part of the game is just how expensive it is, making sure it matches, and then making sure that you're putting down enough. And I think that kind of gets to another slide as well.
Yeah, great question. And is that the next slide, I think? Yeah. Okay. The question is, we are talking very specifically about using sand, bringing in sand to build a beach and a dune. Are there other things that we should be considering, like a breakwater or an offshore reef, something that can break up the wave energy before it gets here? And that's something that some towns have. They might have been, in most cases, been implemented decades ago. And they are not perfect solutions to this situation. If you put a breakwater out there, you can break up the wave energy. Those rocks, that elephant rock that is sitting out here, is helping to stabilize the beach, but it's having no impact on the total water level that is seen along these beaches. So the hurricanes, the southeasters that come and meet the dunes here, is still going to hit the same water level. It's still going to be up at the toe of the dune, but the wave energy just might be diminished a bit.
So when the wave comes in, is it taking it the force on the bottom or on the top that's taking it more away?
That's a great question. It depends on the slope of your beach. That's something that Sam was getting at, that if you narrow your beach and you steepen your dune, you are now creating a face that's more reflective. What waves are going to be breaking right on it. And that's in a very erosive condition. If you do build something that's more gentle, you can have kind of more rollers that kind of roll up and spill and rush up and come back down. That's a less erosive condition.
And pushing sand out, it's just going to come back.
Again, yeah, if you're trying to work with just the sand that you have, you're kind of playing a game that's just not going to work out in the end. It's going to take more than that.
Can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
I want to add one thing. We understand, and we were happy to explain any solution, but part of the reason sometimes that things are taken off the board is permitting, cost. One other component here is that there's eelgrass out in the near shore, and so putting a structure out there would not be permittable. But a bigger thing beyond that I want to just highlight as we go through this is we know this is stressful and a little overwhelming, but unfortunately there's not going to be a silver bullet answer that solves all the problems at once.
Question in the back?
Good question.
I think I'm being prompted by this man who knows that I forgot to say something very important. Because the question was posed, those construction costs, are those one-time construction costs? And the answer is no. From that modeling that I showed you, a 10-year storm will still cause erosion. So we could expect that maybe on a 10-year recurrence level, or maybe on a 20-year recurrence level, a large-scale project like that would have to be reconstructed. And that's going to be let's move to the next slide, actually. That's why we call it a sacrificial strategy. So one project that was built that made the news in Massachusetts was in Salisbury. Did anybody read that about the beach, that they restored a dune and 2 days later a storm came and it wiped it out? And the news, the headlines were quite alarming. They were like, boy, these homeowners put in a lot of money for nothing. The truth of the matter is that dune that they built provided them the buffer that they needed. That dune was intended to erode. Did they want that to happen in 2 days? Of course not. But that dune was built so that they would have something to erode in front of them as opposed to their homes being hit by waves. So they need to rebuild that project on the scale of things. That was actually a small project, smaller than what we're talking about here. But yes, this is a sacrificial strategy. It needs to be redone. To the funding sources, if a project is publicly funded, there needs to be a public benefit. What does that mean? That means easements need to be signed by all landowners who are receiving the sand. So easements permit lateral access along the beach. Much like the beaches in Massachusetts below the low tide line are accessible by law, this would essentially expand the space that is accessible by the public laterally along the beach.
It's like in Florida, every quarter mile is open access in Florida.
Oh, I actually am not aware of that one.
I'm pretty sure every quarter mile is
Okay. Yeah. It'd be similar to that, or similar to California, where they have up until the high tide line that is open to the public.
Well, there's also another option for beach having that isn't up there, which is to stop clearing the last 700 feet and to let it completely wash over, which it tries to do all the time, and then it will stabilize itself. It'll be flatter, so it won't have that. It'll just be flatter across, and then vegetation will grow there like it used to be.
Yeah.
They cut it in.
Yeah.
And then that doesn't really cost much of anything. Just stop clearing it out. And
Yeah.
let it wash over.
Thank you. So Constance asked the question, at Beach Ave, rather than these large-scale engineering solutions that cost millions of dollars, why don't we just, stop trying to maintain the road and allow the dune to equilibrate on its own?
At least that last
Right, the spit point out to the barrier. Justine will talk about that in a sec. That is a kind of a management approach. So rather than in the large scale engineering plan that will come out from this project, that kind of discussion is going to be in the beach management plan. But it is addressed, so that's a great question. Next slide, please. All right, this is my last slide, and then I'm going to pass it to Justine. But to that man's question earlier about why aren't there other solutions? Why are we only looking at these nature-based solutions? You might be thinking, let's put a seawall along the beach, or let's put a seawall along the roadway to prevent undermine. East Beach is certainly asking that question. But the answer is that seawalls, again, are not a silver bullet. You're not going to find one thing that solves all your problems. If you put a seawall in along the shoreline here, yes, you will lock in the landward of that. But it is all to be disregarding what's seaward of that. So you are drawing a hard line between what is and what isn't. That beach in front of a seawall is going to erode more quickly, and there's going to be less and less sand, and you're going to be left with a seawall that's right on the ocean. And going a little bit further, if you have a seawall that's right on the ocean, it is now taking the brunt of wave energy. This is occurring in Marshfield right now. They have a seawall along a barrier beach, and it's being damaged because it's being battered by waves. It's being battered to the point that they need to continually rehabilitate that seawall, and they even need to bring in beach nourishment, the solution that we're talking about in the first place.
Down this way.
There's-
Talking seawall down there.
At the end of the beach?
The cement one.
Yes, yeah.
That's taking all the sand away at that point, right?
It's essentially locking in the sand that's landward of it, yes. So rather than allowing the beach to equilibrate and move seasonally, gradually over the long term with sea level rise, it's trying to plant a flag, and it's essentially just the water is going to come up, and you're going to be left with a seawall in the ocean at the end of the day.
And also these seawalls, the historic seawalls, obviously they didn't know then what they know now. But those are, the result is that the other areas that don't have them are sediment starved. because there's no erosion in those areas. So if you had an open shoreline, you'd have even contribution of the sand along the shoreline. But when you do lock that in, there's no way for those areas to erode, which then continue to sediment starve the other parts of the shoreline. So you're always sort of balancing and robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of things as engineering construction.
Yeah, thank you. All right, one more question, then I'll pass to Justine. For Atlantic Ave, the large-scale project is 5,000 truckloads of sand. There's a repair in kind clause in the contract to.
So the other question is, can the sand be brought in by barge?
The question is, can sand be brought in by barges to avoid damaging the road with 5,000 trips of a truck? And the answer is yes. That is something that sometimes can happen. It depends on, the conditions that are offshore. Contractors may or may not be open to, this high wave climate, especially because construction typically takes place in the winter time. So that can be a little bit riskier. The state is looking into offshore sand sources, but that is a tough sell. It might be hard to dredge offshore onto a barge and bring it inshore to here. Yeah, so the question is, there used to be a discussion of mining a sand source offshore Horseneck Bight, and that sand, is it compatible? There has been a lot of studies. There's just recently a study by the state to core and grab sediment offshore and see what is the grain size. So in most cases, it's a little bit finer than the beach that you have here, in most cases. But some of it could be compatible.
So technically, we do nothing. All that sand and
So technically, I think the answer is that the town is not going to do nothing, which segues into Justine. At a very minimum, we are doing this beach management plan to improve day-to-day management. But large scale, it does take a larger conversation.
Well, because of the overwash, it does end up on Atlantic Avenue, right? So, as Connor said, we kind of joke internally that Connor does the doom and gloom and tells you how expensive it would be and how intense the truckloads would be. And then I come in with my soft, small approaches. But maybe you're a little more excited for small approaches after hearing his. So the beach management plan is almost more of a municipal document that helps with interdepartmental coordination of how we're doing certain activities and provides guidance on best practices for activities. So mine don't seem as exciting. Mine are like, what do we do with the rack that washes up on the beach? What do we do about dog waste, vegetation, and overwash of materials? But when that material overwashes onto a roadway, there's actually a best practice of how to do it. And in some circumstances, if people don't have the knowledge of how these systems work, that practice can be done inappropriately, and then it doesn't help the barrier survive and respond. So, can you go to the next slide? One of the things that the beach management plan focuses on are all of the different approaches and how they should be taken. So we have the first part of the beach management plan focuses on the existing conditions. Similar to what Connor said, we have sediment graphs, we have species of plants in the dunes, we have elevations, we have existing conditions plans, we have property ownership. And when you're thinking to yourself, well, why does that matter? The property ownership, as an example, matters in case you want to do a dune nourishment project. So at the Nubble, for example, it's a patchwork of ownership of the Nubble. You would need to get everyone to agree to that passive recreation along their property and get buy-in. So these things are important for us to document. We also find in a lot of municipalities that there are a lot of people who've worked in their job for a long time. But if they leave, that institutional knowledge has gone with them. So part of the goal of the beach management plan is to document the permitting history, practices, and what's been done in the past. But the next section looks at those best management practices. And a lot of that is informed from guidance from the state. And we'll have worksheets that, or not worksheets, they're fact sheets that have been developed by CZM that we have a QR code in the back of the presentation, which talks about some of those things. So I'm going to use vegetation as an example. Vegetation, if you plant it, should only be done above the high tide line. You need to have the appropriate spacing of the vegetation. You need to be cognizant of what plants you use. So those things are all very clearly defined so that if a project is taken place, that it is done appropriately. Some actions will be permitted after the beach management plan is done, things that can help the town do certain practices on the beach. For example, in some towns, it will be rack removal, right? That a certain type of vehicle can come onto the beach. It can pick up 2/3 of the storm-related rack and remove it from the beach in case it's a health hazard. These are things that aren't super exciting every day, but when, for example, in Hull, recently they've never done rack removal from their beach. They had a huge storm come, and they were like, what do we do with this rack? Rack, again, sorry, is seaweed. We think about that dark rack line that washes up. They were like, what do we do with this rack? Their beach management plan had guidance about what type of vehicles, how deep to go, shake out the sand, who to contact, what emergency permit to file. So those are the types of things that help set the town up for success so that when storms happen, when incidents happen, they kind of have a guidebook. But it's also a public-facing document that enables the community to understand why we're doing things the way they are. Right? When you see someone come with a truck and they remove all the material from the road, you might want to understand why they do a certain practice. So those are the things that are described in the beach management plan. That's a great question. Constance asks, why is rack a public health concern? It's not usually, but sometimes if a lot of rack washes up in a storm, not only can trash wash up in it, but it can sit and rot on the beach, which can happen, but sometimes we like to leave it for foraging of species and birds, so it's usually not a bad thing. It's more in a sometimes thing. And the last section is also recommendations. So in concert with conversations with the town, conversations with regulatory agencies, conversations with the public, we've also developed a suite of recommendations that the town could move forward. So Constance had referenced that 700 feet to the western end of Beach Ave. So as a spoiler, one of the recommendations would be put up a gate that would still allow, so if you can envision with me, if you haven't been down there in a while, there's a current opening where there's a town access point, okay? If you put up a gate right there, could you close it off, stop managing the roadway, allow some of the overwash to overwash, right, and to nourish your dune for free, so to speak, and still allow recreation to that area? By foot, not by car. But part of that takes a lot of conversations, right? With property owners, we also want to make sure that if we did something like that, that we relocate that accessible parking, that we move the Moby mat. So we want to be thoughtful about how we do things. So those recommendations are defined, which party would be responsible. And for some of the projects, to Connor's point, if we can pinpoint a funding mechanism that could be helpful, we'll also describe that. So it describes organizations. So if you have thoughts or recommendations or things that you'd like to see change, I'm happy to talk about that with you. But we do right now, I believe we have about 15 recommendations, and they run the gamut, right? One I believe is, why don't you do a beach cleanup every year in the spring? Before the birds come, go and start organizing. The beach committee could host a beach cleanup. That sounds like something small, and maybe it might sound silly to some, but that's a great practice that also brings the community together and helps focus on the beach resources. So the beach management plan kind of includes, we always use the bucket term, but it's got kind of those major components. And the hope is that that can be a document that helps connect a lot of people. So the two plans are connected. We're going to meet again, like we said, so the Barrier Beach Management Plan sets up the town as a public guidance. Go back.
This one?
Yeah, and the feasibility lays out the cost and benefit. So all of these will be in the same document. Connor's is actually an appendix to my plan, but they're all together, okay? So this planning effort, I think one thing that's important for you to understand is we are at the initial stages. We have just drafted the plan. We've just talked to municipalities. We're not forcing, again, anything on anyone. These are just things that we've developed in a working group, and we're gonna meet on Monday to talk about all the nuts and bolts of the beach management plan. If you have questions, I'm happy to talk about any of those pieces with you today. Next month, oh, can you go to the next slide? I'll come back to that one. Oh, it's gone. It's in my other presentation. I lied to you. Next month, we're gonna meet with the select board and talk to them to make sure that they understand where we're at and what's going on with this planning effort. And the hope is that Michael has applied for grant funding for another phase of this project, which would continue this work forward. So this project isn't ending right now. It's honestly just the beginning of this planning effort. But I think a big push, especially for the town going into the winter season, was having a basis of documentation that can help as storms come and as everything else happens. So that draft will be made publicly, I believe, in the fall, and then all of you are able to page through it, give feedback. We're going to keep coming back and talking to the public. The town is going to keep coming back. So this is just really kind of in terms of the beach management plan, this is really just a kickoff. Connor's study is kind of at its final phases. He can talk to you about those nourishment profiles. Mine's just at the start. And I talked briefly about fact sheets. So CZM has, is it Storm Smart fact sheets? Properties fact sheets. I always say it wrong. I have dyslexia, don't mind me. But if you scan this QR code with your phone, there's one on vegetation planting, dune nourishment, and sand fencing, which outlines some of the practices that will be in the beach management plan. Sand fencing, for example, sometimes you put it in direction of the wind, sometimes you put it in a zigzag fashion, sometimes it's just to keep people off the dunes. All these things are things I find really interesting, but I understand they're not interesting for everyone. But we've also been going for an hour, and I'm cognizant that I can barely sit still for an hour. So I would vote, we're not going anywhere. We will still be here, but I feel like we should end the seated portion of this event.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
From earlier, what this gentleman's conversation about what happens if you do nothing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
So
Take the mic, Sam.
So I think that what's really important, and again, my name's Sam Haynes, I'm with Mass CZM. I think what's really important, again, is none of these options are being forced on the town. The town is going to use this information to make its decisions. So there's only a certain amount of resources that a community has, just like there's only a certain amount of resources that the state has. So, we prioritize those resources. Doing nothing or just managing it for as long as possible may be the option that you choose because you don't have those resources. So, when you look at a roadway, there's a lot of legal aspects of managing a roadway for a municipality too. Who does that roadway serve? Are there other ways that roadway could serve the residents? Are there utilities on that roadway that have to be preserved? So there's a lot of things that go into it from a municipal standpoint, but these are all decisions that ultimately will go to the Board of Selectmen, go to town meeting. None of these are just to provide you with that information so that you can make informed decisions.
But it's not the Elephant Rock Beach Club's not going to pay for that. That is a thing.
I'm sorry.
That's a Westport.
So on private property, if without going for the grants and the easements thing, private property would be responsible for their cost on their property. The town, and this is why we did it, why we looked at the roads and not Terry and Webb and some of the other ones that didn't have the roads. This is focused on, making decisions about the transportation of the roads, and how long, what would protect those roadways and things like that. There's a lot of other information that's helpful to the beach, helpful to properties, but the town really wants to look at their own infrastructure and see what they could do to improve it. So the town could, work out some plan if they see that this road is, critical to their infrastructure. they could work with the Elephant Rock Beach Club or some other private entities. You know, that would be all decision making that occurs later on after you get through this information and cost phase.
All right, but again, we're here to answer more questions. Thank you all for your patience. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Big round of applause, yeah, to Woods Hole Group. Thank you.